morning, all my beautiful, beautiful listeners out there, and I hope you're having a fantastic Intangible Commerce Wednesday. And welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Ray Roberts, normally joined by David, joined by David, normally joined by our co-host David. We've had a lot of crazy travel, so I'm going to go solo on this one, and I hope you guys will stick with me. All you beautiful people out there, guys, gals, thanks for watching and welcome to today's episode. Getting into some things that are going on in the market where I think they're going to really start to have a bigger impact. There's this terrible situation still going on at the Panama Canal with respect, especially to the fact that a lot of oil products, when you look at what comes through the canal, right, the biggest things, I guess, or the most impactful are going to be vehicles, petroleum and petroleum products, so like oil, gas, right? The thing that's already skyrocketed. Bad news, everybody. Prices are going up. Terrible news, because they're already just astronomically high, which, as we know, is the factor that drives up the cost of everything else that we buy, like literally everything. So it's just, yay. The straw that broke the camel's back. Grains, which we've all heard about the grain deals and in and out of Ukraine and that horrible situation happening to those poor people and in that part of the world. And so, even though there are some shipments coming out or have come out, getting them through the canal is now a challenge or impossible. To some degree, it's actually going to slow down again. The rains that they're hoping to come don't look like they're going to come, and so it looks like this thing could get even more restricted than what it is now. We have coal that comes through there. Thank God the U.S. has a lot of coal mines, but if you don't know, a lot of power for electricity that we use and love and are using currently right now in this studio comes from coal burning. Indiana doesn't have nuclear power plants anywhere near me. It's all coal powered. And Coke, apparently. I don't know. I mean, this article here says that Coca-Cola comes through there, but I'm not sure which direction. Maybe it's coming out, because shout out to Coke. I know there's a production facility in Atlanta, and all their products are here made in the U.S. So for what we're consuming anyway. So I'm gonna get my DC. I hope you guys and gals can too. But when you look at that crisis that's happening, I mean, that biggest concern for me is definitely going to be the oil, right? The fact that gas prices are already super duper high. Yeah, they can still get here, but they're going to take the long way, and then they're going to use that. And you know how I don't need to really go on a limb here and be like, yeah, the news pundits and all the investors and all that are going to say, oh, well, based on the additional risk and ocean travel, the price is going up, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to go up relative to the additional cost. It's going to go up relative to the proposed or perceived risk value assessment that they're going to get, which means it's going to be much higher. I don't know what else to say about that, other than my biggest concern is that prices of everything are already super high, crazy high. And now with this, it seems like, could we not have seen that coming? Was there not an alternative? Because it wasn't like, just if you're not maybe aware, I'm rambling. I haven't had enough coffee today, but this drought didn't happen in a week. It didn't happen in even a month. It has been coming on for over a year. So contingencies that weren't made based on the local conditions of the canal are now our problem. It's always the consumer that floats the bill. It's not your fault that these decisions weren't made. It's not your fault that an alternative wasn't sorted out sooner and product wasn't brought through in larger quantity earlier to circumvent and prepare for this issue, but it is your problem in the way that you're going to be floating the bill. The corporations and companies that bring these products through are never going to float the bill. The folks making 30, 40, 50 million dollars a year are still going to make 30, 40, 50 million dollars a year salary, and they are not taking the hit, which is quite frankly appalling that poor planning and poor decision making is floated by the US consumer. And I think the US consumer, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think the US consumer has just about had enough. It's getting to a point where you can't afford to take your kids out for ice cream, and that's a problem because ice cream's $10 a cone. It's not quite that bad now, but geez, it's not hard to imagine that a time when that could be a thing. So it makes you wonder, when does it stop? At what point does the camel's back actually break? When do we get, because I've heard reports and people did a comparison between the Great Depression and our current economic situation, which they don't call it depression anymore. We call it recession. Okay, fine. Whatever moniker you want to give it, it still sucks for the end user, aka you and me, right? But when they drew that comparison, it was that wages are worse now by comparison to products now than they were during the Great Depression, which really makes you wonder, what the heck's going on? how how are we worse off now in 19 or than in 19 whatever 30s? It was basically in the 30s, 29 to 30 something. How are we worse off? And you draw images of the food lines and all these things. Is our state-run infrastructure just that much better that we're not seeing it? Is it that Americans have access to credit more so than they did back then, because it wasn't a common thing for someone to have a $30,000 credit limit? When you look at the markers for this, I was talking to a friend of mine. I was at a trade show and talking to a friend of mine, and when you look at the markers for debt, the average American debt increase has skyrocketed over the last 5 years. There, and maybe even some folks listening are getting by day to day by using credit cards. They're paying their mortgage on credit. They're buying their groceries on credit. And the cost of this stuff is continuing to rise on the back of things like the canal. There are things and situations that are going to happen that that are knee jerk, right? Like, I'll give you an example. Hurricane as an example, right? A hurricane comes along, and hey, that's an event. Yeah, we kind of knew it was coming, but they changed direction really quickly. It's hard to pivot and really plan around a hurricane. There's hurricane season. You can do your things there. Maybe you're bringing some more inventory over. That sort of 2%, 5% bump in inventory purchase, something like that. But on the back of this horrendous economy, the worst I've seen, horrendous economy, on the back of that, you would think that proper planning would be going into place, especially when the drought at the canal has been going on for over a year. But here it is. The hammer is going to fall, and it's going to fall squarely on you and me. And another thing I guess really to bring up is that we're still in hurricane season, right? So now that I'm kind of going down that path, let's unpack that a little bit. My favorite word, unpack. Let's unpack that a little bit. You're looking at a situation down where we've got hurricane season happening. So the southern hemisphere and these things come up and like to knock on our door. You got a bunch of ships just sitting out there. There's an inherent risk to having a boat on the water, right? Like everybody understands that the ocean is, while not holding too many secrets on the surface anymore, still an inherently dangerous place to be chilling out, especially if you're a gigantic container ship and you've got really nowhere to go. And a hurricane comes along, you got like 100 ships sitting out there at the canal waiting to get through. That's only going to get bigger and bigger, right? Like it's not, the problem's not getting better. So alternative planning needs to come into place. Are the ships fueled properly? Do they need more fuel? Can the local Panama economy, and own reserves, can they handle that fuel load? Is it going to cost more? Yes, it always does. Demand's going to go way up. So many factors are going into play here. The risk to bring the goods across, the cost to bring the goods across. Now it's the length of journey, which increases the risk. All these things play a factor back down into price. Why am I rambling about this? Back down to price. You and me are going to float that bill every single time. And the price is going up. It won't stay the same. So here we are yet again, about to get hit with another price increase on goods that are already astronomically higher than ever before. And people aren't making more money. By comparison to the 1930s depression, people make less by comparison to the cost of living. That disparity needs to change. It has changed for a certain group. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these folks that thinks we should all make the same and live the same and have the same. Heck no. You work hard, you get what you deserve, you go out there and you make it happen. There's a lot of nepotism in wealth. Most of it's nepotism. Be honest. Dad owns the company, son owns the company, his son owns the company, so on and so forth. Daughter, cousin, so be it, right? They're all the leaders of these organizations to a degree. Good on you, right? Everyone here in America has the opportunity to build what they want to build, how they want to build it. For the most part, there are things, but for the most part, you can go out there, you can get it, you can make it happen. But when I look at that group of individuals and people at the tops of these companies still raking in that same amount of money, all while the pressure on the U.S. consumer has never been so high, it makes you stop and wonder, why can't we decide as a people to support each other in times of need and crisis? And to say that this is a time of crisis is not a hard thing to say. It's not a far-fetched idea that right now America is in crisis. There are so many factors economically that are just crushing this economy. I basically said the same thing twice there, but I think you get my point. So then here we are, left to float that bill, float that boat for another thing that could have been prevented. So the congestion being so bad that the cost just to even go through it has gone up. It's like we're just taking advantage of each other because we can. It's like what took place that brought us to where we are? Is it greed? Is it I guess, can I call it anything else? Now that I think about it, I don't know that I really can. It is greedy. There's an article out there you can read on Business Insider. There was I don't know exactly who did it, but they paid. There was basically a lottery of sorts to jump the line, so you can pay a bunch of money to get in front of the line. So there's basically a an auction of sorts, and you can bid. And this one company paid $2.4 million to skip the line. What is going on? $2.4 million to skip the line. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. What in the world is going on? We've monetized it. We've monetized drought. Like, this is a whole new layer of human evolution, right? We have monetized natural disaster and drought. $2.4 million to skip the line. Never mind that Panamanians, over half the country, gets their drinking water from this lake. Never mind that. Forget about that. $2.4 million gets you through. We don't care how little water we've got left. Come on through. There's 108 vessels at both sides of the canal right now. So let's do some math. More showing up every day probably, but 216 boats. 216 boats are just hanging out, waiting to get through. And the whoever runs the canal is like, hey, you can come through. It's going to cost you. I mean, normally it costs to get through, right? It's not like it's free. It's $150,000 to like $1 million or whatever to get through. So you're going to go and say, hey, you guys want to get through? You pay more money, you can get through. You can skip the line. Incredible what we're willing to do as a species to get ahead. And the people who run the canal are getting filthy rich off this. Why wouldn't they like the drought? In this case, it's just sickening. It's just sickening because nobody thinks about the external, what's going to happen after this. It's just, oh yeah, let's make a bunch of money. You want to get through? $3 million get you to the front of the line. That's a friend's price. Hey, what do you think? Come on through, buddy. It's just ridiculous. I had to wet my beak there a little bit. Been yammering on about ports and human disparity for the last 17 minutes or so. And I started this off by saying good morning, and it is a good morning. It's a good morning to make change. It's a good morning to think about what can we do. Elected officials are where this whole thing starts. What are they worried about? What are they focused on? Is this something that that they're willing to look at and consider? What could we do to come together as an American people and change how things are done and better prepare for the future crises that are going to happen? What can we do as a capitalist society too? We got a ton of money, right? America's just got a ton of money. It's just everywhere. But the folks that have it are hanging on to it. They're hanging on to it, and they're being, a little stingy. Let's call it stingy. Be a little stingy. Y'all quit being stingy. Y'all quit being stingy with the purse strings. Help where you can. I'd wonder, what could we do as a people if we came together and decided that, you know what, it's time to change. Absolutely time to change. And when you look at change, as well, the climate itself, man, is it just getting worse and worse every day? I mean, first we had that smoke clogging up the airways to the point where you couldn't even go outside in Chicago, New York, here in Louisville. We had it really bad everywhere from these wildfires. And then Greece, it catches fire, and my goodness, it burned. And then, of course, Hawaii just recently. And now you've got the floods out in Libya. I mean, just catastrophic events that are taking place. All the while, we still have these debates over, is climate change real? Well, the evidence would suggest, based on all the historic heat wave, historic floods, historic fires that have taken place over the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, yes, yes, it's changing. Yes, we need to plan for this and understand what models exist that help us prepare for things like the Panama Canal drought. If you knew it was going to happen, why are there 216 vessels sitting outside the dang thing waiting to get through? And the government saying we're cutting it down even more because the drought persists. How is it possible that we live in a society who talks every single day about AI? I just came from a conference yesterday. 2 days I'm out there. Every single conversation, I'm using AI this way. Are you using AI? We're using AI. AI. It is obviously not being used that well if we still can't use it to machine learn and model out environmental impacts and how to reroute infrastructure or assets based on a perceived threat of environment. I mean, like, come on, what are we doing here? So we need to get ahead of that because this thing isn't stopping. I mean, what happens when that drought in Panama continues, and it gets shut down for good? Maybe not forever, but for good for now. Nobody comes through. Sorry, guys and gals, you're in the boats. Bugger off. We can't help you. Get out of here. What then? Imagine that traffic jam too, getting out of there because all the boats are getting into the shipping lanes. That'd be like a weird looking cruise. But we need to start thinking about that. If we're not already, we need to start thinking about that and start preparing and planning for these eventualities. It's no longer a what if. It's a when. When the drought happens to this port, that port, which one has the lower sea level, right? Are we getting to a point where the ships can't even dock? I'm not saying we are, but I'm asking the question. Are we getting to a point where if these drought conditions continue in certain parts of the world, what impact does it have on our ability to even get in and out of a port? Because some of these have very narrow channels. And if it's too narrow, the vessel fully loaded can't get out. It can get in, but it won't be able to get out because it sits lower in the water when it's loaded down. That's how buoyancy works. So what's going on? What's happening? How are we going to do something different about it? How do we evolve? Because that's what happens, right? This is capitalistic society. The benefit to the capitalistic society, we pivot. It costs money, so therefore I care about it. It costs time, which is money, so therefore I care about it. And when I care, and when I say I am speaking on the behalf of corporations of America, I've seen this time and time again, when they care about something, this really unique solution comes up or this alternative plan gets put in place and things happen that changes outcomes for the better. Now, whether or not that's going to benefit you and I is going to depend on the solution and for whom it's been put in place. If the solution is put in place to simply protect investors and their investments, then it means really nothing to you and me. We're still, out here doing our thing. If it's put in place to protect a brand image, then it will affect consumers in a positive way normally. There might be some give and take. So I guess my ask is for brands to care more about the way they're perceived in the community by the people who support it than on the behalf of the already filthy rich investors who don't need that extra 500 grand or a million or two or whatever. They just want it. It's like a toddler. I want that. What I want is for us as a people to realize these companies are who they are because we've made them that way. They are who they are because we continue to support them. And when we come together and focus on those brands and companies who truly care about their people, shout out Texas Roadhouse and other folks who CEOs gave up 100% of their wages during COVID to make sure their people had what they needed. Those are the types of brands and folks and companies and corporations that we, the U.S. consumer, will support. And going forward, there's an older generation who has their way about them, but the younger generation of buyers see things differently. They don't care about your longevity. There's very little evidence to suggest that a person in today's market, a young person, right? We're talking mid-30s down to the teens. That consumer does not care how long you've been around. You see these companies with 145 years in business, they don't care. They don't. They want to know who you support, why you support, and what are you doing for the environment and for the people that make you who you are. That image is what is going to drive future businesses, and the ones who don't care about that will cease to exist. But look at Yellow. Over 100 years in business. If they can fall, anybody can fall. All these banks as well. So there's just so much going on. It is impossible to cover on a positively uplifting episode of Intangible Commerce. Sometimes we got to get real and touch the things that are otherwise untouched and talk about and unpack. My favorite word, still my favorite word, unpack the things worth unpacking or worth talking about or considering. And so I hope on that bombshell that you got something useful out of today's episode of Intangible Commerce. And thank you so much for everybody who subscribes, supports, and continues to watch the channel. Really appreciate you tuning in today and spending some time with me this morning, this afternoon, evening, whenever you're watching the podcast. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify. We got a YouTube channel as well. So if you guys have never seen the smiling face, you can tune into our YouTube channel, Intangible Commerce, and check us out there. And as always, I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful week. Good luck, and thank you so much. We're out.